Hey everyone, welcome back to More Than Work this week, or welcome if it's the first time you're here. I'm really glad to have you, and you're in for a great episode, really, if I don't say so myself, which I do. So, I have B. Kyle on, and she is the CEO of the St. Paul Chamber of Commerce in Minnesota, and I'll get into that in the intro to the podcast too when I introduce her. But we had a really great conversation, and we do talk about the tragedy, the death of George Floyd, which did occur in Minnesota last year. And so that really was the catalyst for a lot of the social justice movement and Black Lives Matter movement that was going on last year. I mean, Black Lives Matter existed before then, obviously, but just what really galvanized the world. I mean, I'm living in London, as you probably know, and there were protests going on here, and there's a lot of diversity inclusion events and activity going on at the company I work for now in England, and it really just around the world the impact was felt, but it was also felt very much in Minnesota, very much in the community where B is working and a leader in her community. And so it was really an honor to get to talk to her about that and to have a very candid discussion about what that meant in her community and how she felt just on a personal level and then as a community leader. And I hate to say I'm really excited to share this with you. I think sharing tragedy is very hard, but I'm really honored to share this with you. And then we talk about a lot of other things too. I mean, she was in the Army, so we talk about her time there, and she just has great thoughts on leadership and just how she's lived her life and in service and with a lot of meaning. And she really admits to just kind of being uncertain of herself in some ways and, working to do the job she's doing now really well and to keep learning. And so I think she's great to talk to. I mentioned in the intro, and I'll mention now, though, my best friend actually introduced me to her. He's on the board of the St. Paul Chamber and some other organizations as well. And when I was looking last year to decide whether I should go back to school or how I should kind of follow through on my purpose to serve, I reached out to a couple friends who were involved on boards of nonprofits, and they reached out to leaders of their nonprofits they work for. And this is a conversation I was really fortunate to have and on my own with her just to get some advice and mentorship. And then I decided also to ask her to be on the podcast. So, by the way, I just finished my first class in the Harvard Kennedy School Public Leadership Credential course. I guess it's not a course. I finished my first course. It's really a program. And so I have 5 more 6-week classes to go, plus a 2-week capstone program. But I'm really excited. I finished this class. It was tough. It was a big challenge. It was a big challenge to me personally and just having to really dig deep and analyze myself. But it was also a challenge just to read Harvard grad level course material. But it was great. And part of the reason I'm there now is just I made the decision was just the people who gave me a chance to talk to them. So I always say this, but I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear how More Than Work has impacted you, or if you have a guest idea, or if you just want to tell me what you think of the show or anything. I'd love to hear from you. If you can review, if you can subscribe, all that, that'd be great. I'm on Clubhouse now. I'm going to start a group for More Than Work there. So if you're there, look out for that soon. My name is Robbie SC on there. But anyway, I think it's just time to get to the show, and I really hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to More Than Work, the podcast reminding you that your self-worth is defined by more than your job title. I'm Rabia, an IT project manager, comedian, nonprofit volunteer, and sometimes activist. Every week, I'll chat with a guest about pursuing passions outside of work or creating meaningful opportunities inside the workplace. As you listen, I hope you'll be inspired to do the same. Hey everyone, welcome back this week. I'm really excited, as I always am. I always say I'm really excited, but I always am excited to talk to people. But I have someone that I met actually through, basically she was talking to me to mentor me and a little bit and just tell me about what she did while I'm thinking about what I want to do in my career. She's president and CEO at the St. Paul Area Chamber in St. Paul, Minnesota. B. Kyle. Hey, B.
Good morning. It's so nice to see your face.
Yeah, it's nice to see. I know. It's like, this is how we can see people now, is through a screen. So
no worries about traveling. I get to see more of you this way. Thanks for letting me be here today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So do you just want to introduce yourself a little bit to the More Than Work audience?
Sure. So my name is B. Kyle. I do work at a Chamber of Commerce in the state of Minnesota. Do you have United States listeners? Or are they
mostly U.S.?
Okay, so they know where Minnesota is. And I've been in that role for about 3.5 years now. And my background is private sector. So this has been quite the adventure for me to learn about how to operate within the structure of a chamber.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I would say, too, just kind of also, because is your role really in the Chamber of Commerce, you're kind of helping guide businesses and how like planning goes around business in your community, right? Is that?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I've been studying that question for myself over the course of these last years, just to make sure that we're bringing value to the members. So, clearly a chamber structure is based on membership, participation, and support. And then our job is to do the work on behalf of those members. And there's this delicate balance between, it's the same in politics. You can be a leader that says, hey, you know me, you trust me, let me do my thing, continue to trust me. And then basically the chamber kind of takes on the drive of the leader, and you hope that you just have to trust that the leader kind of knows what they're doing based on their value system. And then the second path is this idea of, let me poll my membership or my constituency, ask them what's important to them, what do they, and then you do their work. So I think the second is harder for a leader because you've got to trust somebody else's priorities rather than your own gut and instincts. And yet in my mind, there's a little bit of a balance where you have to trust who you are and what your skill set is that they hired. And then you've also got to make sure that using those skill sets and those talents in service to the broader priorities of the organization. So each chamber is a little different because each community is different. Some are really focused on community service. Some are really focused on advocacy and policy. Others are focused on economic development, for example. And so, but the basic premise is the same, is that you're working to advance the priorities of the business community within your community.
Mm-hmm. So something we're kind of past the holiday season now, thank goodness, because that was hard this year, or last year. But so something like Shop Small, is that an example where you would help like promote an idea, or shop local, that kind of thing?
Sure. So you saw a lot of that last year, right? With such burden on the small business due to COVID-19. And so there were all kinds of campaigns across the country around shop local, invest in your retailers, buy food and order out kind of thing to give your restaurants business. And then depending on the community, you either do that work yourself so St. Paul, of course, is the capital city of the state of Minnesota. And we have two twin cities, St. Paul and Minneapolis, and each of us is driven by a very large regional chamber. And so we have the good fortune of having resources like we've got a strong economic development entity. We've got a convention and visitors bureau called Visit St. Paul. And so we work with our partners. So the idea with Visit St. Paul is they're all about promotion and marketing of the city. And so we can partner with them in the support of the small business campaigns that you're talking about. So we saw a lot of that this past year. Yeah, and then, of course, the other piece of a chamber then is, I would say, kind of moving in these. Again, my tenure in this business is not 20 years, but just what I'm learning from folks is that there's a growing sense of a holistic approach to business development, such that a strong business community must be rooted in a strong community and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So there's real focus on how can we advance community priorities as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. I have one of my best friends who lives in Minnesota, and so
Yeah.
when I was doing gifts for a few people, I was trying to go to all the like local places in their communities, and it was tricky
Yeah.
being I'm in London, so it's even more tricky. But it was kind of fun to try to find cool stores in different
Mm-hmm.
places that I
Mm-hmm.
now want to visit.
Right. Right. Isn't that neat?
Yeah, it's nice to just hop off of Amazon every once in a while and feel like you're serving someone else, even with your purchase. So that's really cool.
You've seen small businesses really having to pivot what had been a 3 to 5 year plan around digital delivery, or if you're a restaurant, online ordering and delivery of food and all that. What had been a 3 to 5 year plan suddenly became a 3 to 5 month plan,
Mm-hmm.
right? To go, and you think about even us communicating via a digital platform. I mean, all of this had to be ramped up. Instead of, hey, we've got to work to some kind of a digital platform in the next 3 to 5 years, we've got to do it now.
Yeah.
And I've been quite impressed at how well small business has done to adapt to that work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because a lot of places, I mean, maybe didn't even have a website before or some way
Right.
of ordering remotely or anything. So I think just staying on this track, and then I want to go back in time and talk about your early career, but we'll just stay with kind of Minnesota and the Chamber of Commerce. So two things happened last year. One was the pandemic, but two was in your community was the death of George Floyd. And that had to be a big pivot. And when you talk about like having a strong community and a strong business community, how did that change kind of maybe your positioning and how you dealt with like a community that had to heal really and have empathy for also in a community where things were being destroyed essentially? Like, how did that change how you dealt with that?
Oh my gosh. Last year was horrible.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the tragic loss of George Floyd, there's so many words. It's hard for me even to start talking about it. The horror and the tragedy of the moment,
Mm-hmm.
followed by the civil unrest that caused $100 million of damage in the city of Minneapolis and the city of St. Paul, and the grief of the community. And what was hardest for me? I'll tell you what was hardest was watching my Black friends talk about this death with a resignation, an air of resignation.
Mm.
Here we go. One more Black man killed.
Mm-hmm.
That was so gripping for me. Earlier last year, it was 2019 now, that we did a meeting entitled "Our Hidden Figures," from the movie, talking about Black women that had served in service to the United States government, and they're brilliant people and how they were treated. Well, we have quite an extraordinary community here, and among them we have our own hidden figures. Some now very senior Black women who had worked for NSA and all other aspects of the United States government, and we featured them and interviewed them in this meeting. And then of course we had the next generation of Black women who were their mentees, as it were. And one of the elderly women, she said, I had to go to work. I had to do my job. Meanwhile, the cities were burning, talking about civil rights. Mm-hmm. So that has stayed with me, the Black experience, which has been, as I hear it, I'm trying to go to work. I'm trying to do my job. Meanwhile, my people are being killed around me and no one is doing anything about it. The absurdity and the horror of that they so casually mentioned, right? And so when then flash forward to today, and George Floyd is killed, and it's on camera and it's in public, and the Black community is horrified, and then there's this subtle resignation. It just I just couldn't. It was very, very powerful. And then of course it became violent. And so there's this, Martin Luther King himself talks about violence is the language of the oppressed when they have no other voice. That's where it goes. My sense of things is there is a growing impatience for change. Like it's a concerning impatience for me because it's bubbling over like it did with George Floyd. That said, I mean, what it also did was, start to stimulate more real accountability work in the community. Like, we've got to do something different. Otherwise, it's quote unquote just one more Black man killed in the street, right? How can we use this tragedy as a way to turn things around moving forward? And I don't know, even when I talk to my friends in the Black community, there is a glimmer of hope, but there's a lot of skepticism, like nothing's going to change.
Right.
People aren't going to care enough about what happens to other people, them, the Black community. If the white majority is saying, that's them, there's not enough motivation to change. So there's a lot of skepticism and weariness. But I also would say there's been notable activity in the community relative to how can we do things differently. And we're also learning that it's not just about the Black community and the non-white community overall. It's not only their job to talk about this and stand up for this and advocate for this, but indeed it's up to the white community as well as allies to understand how the horror of this and advocate for change. So we're seeing some of that. The good news is, we raised about $1.3 million to give back to the small business community that was devastated by the civil unrest. Minneapolis certainly has struggled with this idea about defunding the police because, which is another extreme reaction that is not practical or helpful.
Well, and it's just to interrupt you, it's like a marketing name versus it's not to me. And it's like, it's like a term, like a buzzword, but it's not like actually like a policy.
In Minneapolis, they wanted it to be a policy. There's some city council people who thought that would be a great idea. But you're right. It's madness. It's another knee-jerk reaction to a horror that is not going to help anything. There's a lot of police reform that can happen, most definitely. Right. And good cops. I'm a veteran, so cops and firefighters are like our cousins, right? So the vast majority of public servants care deeply about the community. And so those good cops are interested in reform to protect the community as well. So all that to say, George Floyd was a tragedy, a horror that reflected our community and across the country when you think about what happened last year. And if from that can be change, because the real issue is about economic opportunity that we're trying to address and the equal access to that and building a Black middle class and really harnessing everybody. St. Paul right now is a minority majority city. If you count our children, we are a minority majority city now. And frankly, if you've got the majority of your city under experiencing economic success, you are failing, not only economically and morally, but just the future of the community is at risk when not everybody gets to be economically successful. So it's a real challenge we're wrestling with.
Yeah. And I can't imagine being a leader in that community or otherwise. Just being here, I was so removed from it, but there were protests here in London, but I was so removed from what I normally probably would have been doing or involved in if I'd been in the States. Yeah. How did you guys raise the money? How did that effort happen?
Well, Minnesota also is, as you look across the country, Minnesota's philanthropic investments are among the highest in the nation. We've got a really strong civic engagement thread here. And so, in fact, it's kind of funny when in 2019, when you talk about themes and what does the chamber say on behalf of the business community? In 2019, we were talking about this idea that business is good, that double entendre. Right? Not only is business good right now, the economy is doing well, but business is good in terms of its desire to serve and engage. And so in 2020, it became business does good. And that does good translated into hundreds of millions of dollars of companies investing in economic recovery, establishing economic justice and social justice priorities, investing back in the community. So what we did as an organization, we just put the call out. We realized there was hundreds of millions of damage in our major corridors relative to the civil unrest after the loss of George Floyd. And we put the call out, created a web page, shared it through media and the community that we were taking donations to support and provide grants for the small businesses on the avenues, and money came pouring in. Shocking. Over 800 individuals and companies. Some sent $5, some sent $250,000 to create this fund, and it was extraordinary. And it wasn't We spent a lot of time also with some of the larger philanthropic organizations to fund it, but it mostly came from business, small businesses, large businesses, their foundations. Some of them aren't even headquartered here, and they said, "Hey, we want to help." And we documented the whole story to create a video to kind of mark the year. And this year, 2021, what we want to do is create the second half of that video, which is some kind of an Invest on the Avenue event that brings the community back together, whether it's day on the avenue cleaning up, food, music, peace gardens, some art installations on some of our buildings to kind of mark this idea that we can move forward.
Yeah.
And so to tell that complete story.
That's great. Well, one of my favorite, I actually have it, but you could almost see it here. I have it hanging, is a Bob Dylan piece, or like I don't know. You can't really see it on my camera, but it's the mural, the Bob Dylan mural that's in Minneapolis.
Yes, that's in Minneapolis. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, it's really cool. I loved it, so I took a picture and blew it up. But, well, that sounds great. I mean, it sounds like you guys really just are trying to just keep working through to take care of what you can as far as the business community goes, and then take care of the community. And I agree. I mean, if you don't have healthy businesses, it's hard to have a healthy community, and vice versa.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more. There's this absolute need for us to be working together. And that's not something I would say that has been expressed commonly in the past. You see a lot of, big bad business haters, right? You see the businesses don't give enough, and business doesn't do their part, which is so far and away from the truth. But the business community has had to be sure that they are engaging in the community because of that reality that you talked about, which has been really fascinating. I mean, for example, we did a study in St. Paul. I don't know, it's been 6 years ago now, to really answer that question. Big bad business doesn't pay its way. Okay, well, let's find that out. So we analyzed the tax structure. So St. Paul, for example, 1/3 of it. So we're a huge parks and green space state, right? The land of 10,000 lakes. So in this capital city, which of course has the government and the libraries, and we've got 5 universities, including the University of Minnesota. If you broke that out, 1/3 of our land is tax exempt. No taxes being gathered, but we have to pay for that, right? And then of course 1/3 is residential, excuse me, and 1/3 is zoned commercial and industrial. And then you take a look at the tax deliverables in each of those 2 zoned, 2/3 there. And what we broke it down to is, as a resident of the state of Minnesota, I pay taxes. Let's just say I pay $1 of taxes. I use about $1.16 of services, just because it costs a lot to take care of me.
Yeah.
The business community pays $1 worth of taxes, and they use about 86 cents.
Okay.
So the whole key is you need more business to subsidize us residents to pay for what we need in terms of services. Right. And yet when you say to the community, here's the numbers, there's the sense of, I don't care. Business isn't doing enough. They need to pay their way. So there's this blindness about being rational about this. And there's also this depersonalization of business. We see business as a thing, as if to say it's not you and me. And so we as an organization actually talk about employers rather than big, bad business, because you can't deny the fact that your brother and your sister and your cousins and your mom and hopefully your kids work in a business, want to be employers. They're people, they're your neighbors who do work. And it's those those employers who pay more than their fair of taxes to support the rest of us to subsidize our services. So, but United States is so uniquely grounded in this connection between healthy business and healthy communities. If you do work outside of the United States, and I talk to international companies regularly who tell me it's not that way everywhere in the world. And it's a lot harder to do business in a community that is not healthy and vibrant on its own. So we get it, and working real hard to promote that here.
So when you just thinking about, you mentioned that you are former military. So
Yeah.
you were in the U.S. Army
Yep.
and had a career in the service basically before going into the private sector. So first of all, just as someone who I think I would say I definitely love America, but I also definitely never saw myself as someone who could even survive physically in the service, right? And I didn't do it. And it's one of those things I think, and I don't know if you hear this from people, that I do regret in a way not having done something, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What made you say, okay, I'm going to take this early part of my life and go into the service?
Well, I agree with you. The service was the best decision I ever made in my entire life. Now, in the United States, the vast majority of military service in the regular army comes from the South and the Southeast.
Mm-hmm.
So up north, it's not a strong recruitment area. Lots of National Guard and reserves up here, but much fewer regular army. So it's an oddity for that we went regular army through ROTC through my university. But to some degree, it's all about family and what your life experience is, which dovetails into the idea about using this mindset for how we introduce kids to new career opportunities as well. So when you start as a kid, you look around your world and you decide that's what the world is. What does your mom do? What does your dad do? And if you don't have both parents, what do your adults in your life do? Mm-hmm. What does the neighborhood feel like? What's the energy there? And you just learn that is reality, whatever that is, right? And it's clearly not the full picture, but you're a kid. You don't know. Well, my life was filled with military. I mean, my mother has 6 brothers and 5 sisters, I know, and all 6 of them went to war in World War II. Mm-hmm. Army, Navy, Marines. My dad was a warrant officer during Korea. And we have lots of police officers. My cousins and my uncles are in the St. Paul Police Department, and they've long since retired, of course. But so I grew up with this experience of that's the world. That's kind of what you do, or you could do as an option. So that was always there for me. And then the concept of the military always interested me because ultimately I kind of see us wanting to be a part of something. Listen, that what you're talking about, this quiet yearning to have said I was a part of something big or important or somehow meaningful. And the military brings you that. And then, of course, what it also brings with you is discipline and leadership training. And uniquely, you're 21 years old and you're put in front of a command of 75 people. And one of them is your first sergeant. He's from Vietnam, and you're supposed to lead this organization when you don't have a clue. And this person clearly does. So you learn a lot about what leadership is and does. And then, of course, ultimately, I was a really poor kid, which is another clear path to the military. You're a poor kid with no direction. You want to be a part of something meaningful, and they're going to help you get through college at the same time. God bless you. So I did. And then I got stationed overseas, West Germany, when it was West Germany. Wow. So in 1986, I arrived in Kaiserslautern, West Germany, and was there when the wall came down and got to observe and experience the fallout of that. Fascinating time to be there, but it was the best decision I ever made to do that. It was fabulous.
So one thing you've written about and you shared with me pretty generously some just leadership thoughts you have. And so I want to read one of your thoughts to you, and then talk about it. I won't impersonate your voice. I'll just read it.
Thank you. You have a nice voice.
Becoming a great leader comes at great personal sacrifice. Simon Sinek has published a book, Leaders Eat Last. Military leaders understand that concept implicitly. When something goes well, you give away all the credit. When something goes wrong, you take all the responsibility. That's the job. So, I mean, I can discern why that's an important thought to you, but how is that idea, first of all, like stuck with you? And then how I can almost say how I think it's applied, but how is it applied to, like, you know, especially now what you've gone through lately, but even throughout your career and coming to where you are?
Well, I think that's a really big question. And leadership, I mean, be careful what you wish for. Leadership is not an easy thing to have or be responsible to do. And for me, it's all about character. And if you're not ready, then you're not ready. Conversely, I also think that you can be a leader no matter where you are in your life, right? You don't have to be the boss of something to demonstrate the principles of leadership. But it's all about character. So when I think about the military, for example, leaders eat last, there's this sense of, when you can choose in my mind, you can choose one of two paths when you move in, as you move up in business in particular, or just in life. You can choose the path of, I'm going to have these people work for me so I can look good and get promoted, right? Because it's all about me. Or you can recognize that your role as a leader is to be the servant of the team, that you want to make sure they have everything they have such that they can do good work. Because ultimately, if they're succeeding and happy and growing, your organization is going to reap the benefits of it, right? But it's all about where you focus your energy. So Leaders Eat Last is exactly that. I care about my soldiers' feet. I care about their weapon. I care about their kids and their family and their home life, and are they paying their bills? There's this holistic approach to, I care about you as a human being. So for all that people might want to bash the military for being, I don't know, militant, the military was actually really progressive in terms of this. Bring all of, when you talk in the business community now about authenticity and bringing your whole self to work and all these newly empowering phrases, the truth is the military has lived that out forever. I care about you as a human being. How are you doing in life? When I was in Germany, we had to deal with the value of the mark changed such that when I moved out there, my young soldiers were living on the economy because it was a 2-to-1 ratio. So you could make a little bit of money, but have plenty to pay your rent. And as I went through the late 80s, that ratio changed such that instead of 2-to-1, it was 1-to-1, and kids couldn't afford to live on the economy anymore. So how are you doing and how's your family doing was real. And a lot of them had to move back onto base and had to figure out housing for them and such. So the idea is if you can focus on them and don't worry about you, ultimately you'll be just fine. And that's the whole basis of Leaders Eat Last. And I think that's the fundamental approach to a healthy leadership style as well.
Yeah. And the whole servant leadership. I mean, that's the one that style resonates most with me and what I try to do. And I think you're right. I avoided a discussion recently, but it was going to be one. And I just decided it wasn't the flag for me to run with. But I was talking about leadership and someone said, well, that's not applicable to everyone's job. It's not job specific. That was the comment. And I was like, in my head, then that there's a problem with that. Like to me, then we have a fundamental disagreement about what leadership is, because in my role, I feel like I can be a leader within my team, whether it's people laterally, there's not really below. I'm a project manager. So I run a project. It's kind of like the personalization of your work in general, right? Just say, well, I'm just a project manager. But I found that so problematic to think that you don't see leadership skills as essential to anyone's job.
Fascinating, isn't it? It's like somehow we have this attachment that leader means you're standing in front of a bunch of people. And I completely agree with you. If I may, I'll tell you a story about the journey to leadership for me. And it's when I say it's all about character, because you have to be full on the inside. And this isn't a state of job. It's a state of mind. It's an understanding about where your value comes from. You can't lead. You can't demonstrate character and integrity and wisdom and pace, when your insides are just all out of whack, and when your insides are driven by, I'm not enough, I need more of this, the sense of hunger, I guess. So to my mind, the work of a person to develop the leadership skills he or she needs just to live life well is about figuring out what your hunger is and filling it in the right way. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out why I wasn't succeeding, why I wasn't feeling full and whole at work. And I realized at some point, I did some small group stuff, some counseling stuff, and realized that I was hungry for the acclaim of man, right? I wanted people to like me. I wanted people to think I was smart. And I wanted people to think I was good enough and that I belonged, right? I was dealing with you from a place of hunger. I need for you to feed me. I need for you to tell me that you like me. I'm smart enough. I belong, all those things. But in so doing, I create this relationship with you where I'm trying to pull things from you, and you can feel it instinctively, whether or not any of us really puts it to word. You have this sense of, why are you needing to be affirmed all the time? Why am I pulling on me? And people move away from that. So I spent some real time trying to figure out how to feed myself in those spaces. And I honestly thought in so doing, I never would get promoted to anything else. Because I was like you, kind of when you say project manager, I was leading in a team and I was working on projects. I figured I needed to stop scrambling for attention and promotion and more money. And, I just had to stop because I wasn't doing it from a place that felt good. I wasn't feeling fulfilled. I was feeling like I was faking it, like I was pretending to be this big, strong know-it-all. And I was one of those people who talk too much. I still talk too much, candidly, because I enjoy connecting with people, but answered all the questions. If I didn't even know, sometimes I would exaggerate or just flat out lie. Sure, I know that when I didn't know that because I wanted to look like I had the answers, right?
Right.
And so releasing all that, and it took me a few years to stop. Every time I knew I wanted to meet Rabaya and get you to feed me and tell me I was okay, I was going to stop. Just not do it. That's a very lonely place for someone who needs to be fed from the outside to stop feeding yourself and just spend some time with the inside. And I felt like I was shrinking and getting smaller and less significant. It was horrible until I finally got to an itty bitty small place that was, it was me. Turns out I'm not an extrovert. I'm an introvert. Turns out I'm deeply introspective. And I really would rather just talk to you and be at home analyzing and running my spreadsheets than being out there talking to people and, schmoozing, quote unquote, for a new job. But when I started interacting with people from a place of my own authenticity, that's when my real relationships started happening. And that's when I actually felt like I was connecting with people because I wasn't wanting to pull from you. Actually, I wanted to listen to you and learn from you. And so real relationships started developing. And from there, my career took off. And the example that you set, to your point about leadership within a team, when you try to do life in your way and on your terms, you give other people permission to do the same. And that's so freeing, right? And I found that to be really, really fun. And I get to be me and do life and still succeed work-wise and then pass it along to other people.
Yeah. I agree with all that. I like that just story of you having to analyze yourself. I think a lot of times what happens, especially in business, is we're so busy in this comparison mode too. So you only felt like you weren't enough because you were looking at other people who you thought were or whatever, right? And at some point, it's like everyone has to learn.
Sorry, I've got my dogs in here. That's another thing we do is we compare our insides to somebody else's outsides. So we're, boy, you look put together. You're smart. You're really eloquent. You're really telling, gosh, you're living in London. That's so cool. And here my little nobody, blah, blah, blah. And so we have that inner monologue that is so destructive because that's not what you're thinking.
No.
And so, yeah, I agree with you.
No, that's exactly right. I do comedy, and one of the things I am playing with is a bit about like people saying you're lucky because, and it's really not something that has anything to do with lucky. And maybe it's not even something you feel bad about yourself, but they're like, oh, you're so lucky, whatever. It's like, okay, well, you have a house and kids, and I'm no, so yeah. So it's funny. Another thing you said about leadership that I really liked, and it's just that I'll read is, if you do that job well, and it's whatever job you were talking about, jobs in general, but if you do that job well, you get promoted, and at some point you become responsible for the people who do what you used to do, but nobody shows us how to do that. And that's why we wind up with managers and not leaders. And
Yes. Gosh, that excites me so much. But if there's two things, my kids are adults now. I've got a 28-year-old son and a 31-year-old daughter, and they're ridiculous, as you might imagine, ridiculously awesome. And when I think about what I wanted to teach my kids, two things. I wanted them to learn how to think. right, for themselves, but just think. And of course, they wildly disagree with me, which is unfortunate. Clearly, I didn't teach them well enough that wanted them to think like me, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
teach them how to think, and then teach them about context in the world to understand what it is, what the world is about, and how you can fit into it. So you don't walk into the world blind about how to function. Now go back to read what you just said again, because I lost my train of thought.
Sure. So basically, paraphrasing the first part, like eventually you'll get promoted and you'll become responsible for the people doing your job. Yeah.
Yes. And so when you think, so part of the whole teaching people how to think and giving them context for the world, that's the other step of that then, is understanding that your job is to care for the people who care for the work or care for the people. And that's another thing you learn in the military, right? When somebody says, I care about my customer, I want to say, you haven't touched your customer in 10 years. How are you touching your employees, and how are you taking care of them? Because they're the ones who are dealing with the customers. And it's just a mindset. Oh, that's right. How can your people be more? And I will tell you, it's an ongoing battle every day to struggle with ego, and it gets easier every day, but it's still there. Just this morning, I had another little private ego battle. I have a big team. I hire executive level thinkers who are strong-minded, which means they disagree with me. What do you mean you're disagreeing with me? I know everything. So I have to deal with smart people who are willing to disagree with me for the better of the organization. And then I have to be able to listen and learn and be taught, right? So this morning, I just saw two of my public affairs team co-wrote a piece for the newspaper, and they didn't put my name on it. And I had a moment of, I'm totally confessing to you right now. I had a twinge of ego, like, what? And then it took me at least 10 seconds to get over myself, I assure you. And then I was like, okay, this is really good, because you want to make sure that your people get the attention. So frankly, they do the talking, so you don't have to be in public, which is another good thing. I'd prefer to be in the background. But also, wow, look at yourself. You're still in growth mode, aren't you? Because you actually reacted to that emotionally. Like, what about me? What about me? So it's still there. It's always with me, and always, each of us has our own little burden of growth. And we get those twinges in the back of our mind throughout the course of a day or week or whatever. Still a work in progress, but I absolutely have seen that the more I give away, the more I receive. And it's not easy, because the other thing I will tell you is that along these lines of, life lessons, is this idea that doing right, the action of doing right, the decision to do right, the thinking to do right comes first before the feeling or the blessing of having done that, right? I think about within the context of love, for example. Love isn't a feeling. Love is a choice. Love, it's 3 a.m. with a kid that's screaming, who just threw up in their bed. You don't feel good about that. You don't feel all warm and fuzzy in love. You decide you're going to get up and love that and serve that child and clean that child up, and love the blessing later when they're sweet and they smell good and they're sleeping in your arms, which is so wonderful. That's the blessing of the decision, right? And so we, particularly the United States and Western cultures, we have it reversed. We put how we feel first. I just don't feel it, or I just don't blank anymore, or I just felt it, so that's what I did, right? We're driven by what we feel, and if something feels a certain way, then we decide that it is a certain way. When the truth is, I'm going to feel that I like you today, and therefore you're a likable person. Tomorrow, I'm not going to like you so much because I'm having a mood, and suddenly you're not a likable person. The truth of who you are does not change based on how I feel, and yet we operate as if it does, right? And so the challenge of adulthood and the challenge of leadership also is to decide what you believe. And then you act on those beliefs, and the feelings are the caboose. They're going to come later because they change. Your hormones change, your hunger levels change, your ego changes. I don't like you today because you aren't agreeing with me, or because I'm having a bad day, or I didn't eat lunch. When the truth of the matter is, I'm going to treat you like a valuable person, and how I feel about you is going to be the blessing that comes later. And if we could do that reverse more often, where we act on what we know is true,
Mm-hmm.
rather than what we feel, I think we'd make some better decisions.
Yeah, because a lot of times and it's funny because I think texting and instant message and stuff is a good example of sometimes like and I'll just speak for myself. I'll write something and I'll be like, oh, yeah, that's probably not what I wanted to say. Like, that's probably not I got into a thing with some people, and actually one of them might listen to this the other day at work, and I was just responding, but I wasn't thinking about their feelings about what I might have been saying, which I know, I mean, you can't control others' emotions, but I could have used different words to express my point. I was frustrated, but I wasn't frustrated at them as people. It was more just at, some other thing.
Right.
And the way I communicated, though, made them feel like they were personally being attacked. But also, it's like we were both just leading with our feelings at that point.
Right.
And then
right.
I was immediately able to say, no, like, 'cause I genuinely wasn't feeling anything negative towards them as a person. So it was very easy for me to say, no. Like, in my head, I understand why they thought that. That's not what I thought at all. Now, if I had been really negative towards them, it would have been like really bad. But I knew, like, too, that they were reacting how they felt about this thing versus the logic thing. And so I see what you mean. But instant messaging and texting, that's like the worst, because it's just you've sent it and it's done. And it's
based on how you feel. Yep. The too immediate connection. Oh my gosh, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, and the words per minute thing. If you're a fast typer, you can really like do some damage quickly.
You can do some damage. That's exactly right.
Oh, I wish I was a hunt and peck.
I also find that your energy makes a difference in a room too, which has been a learning for me, that if you have a lot of forward energy like I do, some of it is about self-exploration, like getting a sense for how does your energy interact with people. And it's not something you just intrinsically know. You have to observe, how do people react to you in a room? How you communicate impact other people. And it turns out that I have a lot of real forward energy. So you and I can be in a room and I can simply say, I really disagree with you. And you want to be flung back in your seat like I just yelled at you. And I didn't understand that for a long time. I'm like, why did what I just said come across so strongly? So then I have to really dial back how I communicate and how strongly I do that, such that I don't run people over like what you talked about. Because if you got a lot of energy and you want to be passionate about something, how do you communicate with that without running over the person on the other side of the table from you? And that can be a dance, but it's one worth trying to navigate. It's exactly what you said. Check yourself. Okay, I'm clearly a lot of energy about this, but it's not negative towards you, but people don't always make that translation well.
Yeah. There's a shared responsibility. I mean, and it's funny because for example, and I don't know how your family dynamic is, but I talk to my mom every day, and I'm sure, you talk to your kids, and my mom knows I'm very passionate about stuff. So she'll just kind of let me now, like just run. Yeah. And she knows that. And my sister and I will kind of go toe to toe more than me and my mom, just because my mom knows that's just me and how I'm communicating. And with my sister, I have to think more about it because, I can offend her without meaning to, or sometimes I'm being passive aggressive, which is not a good trait, but it's like a family trait at this point. But yeah, it's like your family understands these things, but in business, they're not necessarily understood, the same way.
Somebody told me something once about that very thing, which I was fascinated by. So I have two grandsons, they're 3 and 5, and they're my joy. I get to be a mom again, and it is just fabulous. And when the 5-year-old is running off about something and he's having a little 5-year-old moment, or the 3-year-old, I find myself smiling. Like inside, I try not to smile at them because then they get all huffy, right? So in my heart, my heart is feeling tickled, and I'm smiling at this little human being asserting himself and practicing, communication and having opinions and being declarative and, all the things that a human goes through. And to see that in a little 3-year-old or 5-year-old is just the most beautiful thing ever. And so my heart squishes when I see him do that. And I don't react usually to their nonsense as far as that goes. And then you project into an adult who does the same thing, and suddenly we react completely differently to an adult doing the same thing. And part of it is adults should, quote unquote, know better. But there's also this thing that if my 5-year-old says, I hate you, you're a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
I don't attach any of myself to those words, right? If an adult says to me, I hate you, you're a bad person, I attach myself to those words. And there's a piece of me that wonders, maybe it's true, right? And therefore I react to that because I want to defend whatever I'm actually kind of believing. So I find that as an adult, the things that trigger me, that make me get defensive or make me want to, bark back or something, I pause about it later and say, you clearly thought some part of this was either true or touching a spot that hurts for you, and you got to figure that out so you don't react that way again. But it's a fascinating thing. When you give power to people and you allow them to say words that impact you emotionally, clearly you're still connected to something there that you want to figure out why. Because if the 3-year-old can say things and I don't feel connected to those words at all, and yet I get really attached to an adult's, whatever this person is saying, I don't know. There's some learning there, and I haven't figured that out yet. But I certainly noticed a difference in how we can get caught up into how we communicate with one another.
Yeah, and just react. Yeah, it's true, because certain people say something to you, and you're like, eh.
Right.
But certain people, it eats at you, and it destroys you, and you're just like, why is that destroying me, that person?
Yeah. For me, the piece of that has to do with the assumption of goodwill. When you just said that, I was thinking about, I have a sister who's like that. She says the most offensive things sometimes. I can't believe you just said that out loud. Like, wow. And we've got this assumption of goodwill, right? If I assume that you love me, you're a good person, and sometimes you say things you shouldn't have, right? Or you say something that really offended me. There's this sense of, and we're going to talk through it. It's going to be fine. If I assume not goodwill of you, I assume intent, and that your desire is to say something unkind to me. And that's a whole different set of responses based on my own thinking about you. So we have a lot of control over that too. I used to work with a gal who was just horrible. And I actually went to an HR counselor to manage myself as I was working with her. And what the HR person told me to do was, when the person's talking to you, don't look at them. I mean, not like you're trying to avoid them, but just listen to the words, or even write the words down so that it can be absent their tone, their energy, other physical stuff that annoys you, right? That feels wrong. There's some wrong-headedness there going on, just because what she's saying isn't always bad. She actually has some good ideas. How she communicates them is so problematic that you can't hear what she's saying. So just write down what she says and then look at the words on the paper and deal with the words rather than the person, rather than reacting to the energy of the person, and you'll actually make some progress. It was a huge help for me when I'm dealing with someone whose intent I don't trust, or how they're communicating doesn't work, to focus on the words, write them down, look at it, as opposed to reacting and looking in the eyes of this person. It really reduces the visceral reaction, the emotional knee-jerk, want to fight back kind of stuff, which helps.
Yeah, it's like controlling what you can about them and that conversation.
Yeah.
So just really quick on just thinking about your transition from being in the military and that as a career to the private sector. I talked to someone last season of this podcast who works with actually a couple of people who work with first responders, but one who works with people who are doing that transition. Is there something that maybe you did that really helped you go into the private sector, and kind of relating to people who didn't have that background you did, where you guys were all kind of learning the same leadership style? Or is there something you wish you would have known that maybe someone listening now would be like, oh, that's going to be helpful to me when I transition out?
My transition was pretty seamless. I didn't spend, I had my life was not in the post 9/11. My life has not been about conflict in the Middle East. My career in the military, so I haven't had to suffer a lot of that in terms of transition into the civilian life, which has been my blessing, truly.
Yeah.
I didn't have the burden that so many of my fellow soldiers do. So my transition was fairly straightforward. was all good. I was more mature for my age than normally would have been, given the fact that I had to be in charge of soldiers in wartime ready units. And I had to be in front of people and learn how to be taking care of people and making tough choices and all those kinds of things. So, and generally speaking, at least in Minnesota, the business community is very welcoming of veterans. So you see a veteran on somebody's resume and it's seen as a very positive thing. And so I read about the fact that veterans have a hard time re-engaging and as if to say that there's not a welcoming spirit in the business community. And so I don't know about that elsewhere because I don't experience that here. I do know that there is a strong community here of service to veterans who come back really having suffered and having to make a transition, right? So there's a lot of support there. That wasn't my experience. So we invest in and support our veterans through a lot of the grassroots stuff beyond the yellow ribbon work and that kind of thing. But so I don't have any real advice for veterans re-engaging other than do so and know that your veteran status on your resume is seen as a badge of honor for lots of companies who actually pursue veterans on purpose because of the training that we get when we're in. No matter what you did in the military, you learned more than a person of the similar age out in the civilian world, hands down. And so they're valuable.
Cool. No, and that's interesting too, just the difference between the 10 years or so.
Yeah.
The experience for everyone changed. I didn't think about that. So that's good. All right. So let's get into now the fun 5 questions. So what's the oldest t-shirt you have and still wear?
College of St. Benedict t-shirt.
From when you were back in school?
I was back in, that would have been in 1982 to 1986.
Nice. Okay. So you're like me, keep things. All right. If every day was really Groundhog's Day, like it feels like during the pandemic that we're still in, what song would you have your alarm clock play every morning?
It's a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong.
Nice. Okay. And then coffee or tea or neither?
Coffee with lots of cream.
Yeah. Well, that's good. You're in a dairy kind of area.
Right.
When was the last time you were laughing so hard you cried, or you just, in general, what makes you do that? Where you just,
oh my gosh. So over the holidays, my family is very, very close. My sister, the one who drives me crazy with the things she says. She's also my dearest friend. We are laughing until we cry because every year we take a week-long trip where several of us and our litter of kids go on a vacation together. And this year we went to the Wisconsin Dells in a hotel room and just padded from one room to the other, playing cards and eating all week. And we were falling off our chairs laughing at some of the stuff that we were doing. So
nice.
Great.
That's awesome. And last one, who inspires you right now?
I have the really good fortune of talking to a lot of leaders in big organizations, and they inspire me. And so what I like to do whenever I have time with them is to ask them questions. Like Doug Baker of Ecolab is just retired in December. And I spent some time with him on the phone earlier this week, and he's going to be part of our annual meeting in February. And I ask him questions. Tell me about your leadership process. Tell me what you think about. Teach me, how do you handle balance in your life? I do that with Chris Hilger over at Secure, and I talk to, we have the good fortune of lots of big companies here. So people who inspire me right now, or whenever I get in front of somebody like Rabia, tell me about your life. How do you think about this? What did you learn there? So I find that I get inspiration from the people I meet, and I want to ask you, tell me how you think about your life. And I'm always learning something.
Awesome. Well, and I've learned a lot from you today. So thanks for sharing.
Oh, my pleasure. It's so fun to be able to chat with you so far away, and yet we make it happen virtually. This is great.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for being on More Than Work.
Oh my gosh. You're the best. Thank you for reaching out to me for this.
Of course. Thanks for joining me this week. You can find out more about our guest in the show notes. The music you're probably moving to by now is by Joe Mafia. Find him on Spotify. That's Joe, Maffia. And Rob Metke is responsible for our visual design. You can find him online by searching for Rob, Metke. Thanks, Rob. Let us know who you'd like to hear from or about your own experiences defining yourself outside of work at More Than Work Pod on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Give us a follow. Or visit our website at rabiasaid.com. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening to More Than Work. We'll be back next week with another guest. In the meantime, while being kind to others, don't forget to be kind to yourself.